Hey, thanks for tuning in to Extreme Reloading. Let me tell you what I'm up to in this episode. I'm going to be loading the .308 Winchester for my Ruger precision rifle, and I'm going to be using Lapua brass that I've very carefully prepared. This brass, I just annealed it last night. This is all weight sorted brass, and the primer pockets have been uniformed, worked on the flash holes, and this is overall some extremely consistent brass. I'll be using the CCI Benchrest 2 BR2 large rifle primers, and I'll be seeding those primers with the 21st century shooting tool. You know, if you watched our Primer Mania video series a couple of years ago, you'll see that, and I'm convinced that spending time on primer pockets, flash holes, using good quality primers, match grade primers, bench rest primers, and a tool like this really does make a difference in the consistency of the ammo as well as its precision. I'll be using RL15, and I'm going to be weighing that powder out to an exact tenth of a grain using my RCBS Matchmaster electronic scale. And I'll be topping all that off with a variety of different 168 grain bullets. And we're going to be testing to see if any one of these bullets can kind of unseat the champion. As far as my Ruger precision rifle is concerned, it really likes that Sierra tipped Match King. So we'll be shooting 5 rounds with 168 grain Sierra tipped Match King bullets, as well as 5 rounds with Berger hybrid target match grade rifle bullets. Again, these are all 168 grain bullets. Hornady ELD match 168 grain bullets. Nosler AccuBond long range bullets. And last but not least in this case, Speer target match bullets. I'll be seeding these bullets using the Redding competition seeding die. I really like this bullet seeding die because having shot these all previously and recording the index value that seats that bullet like I want it to, all I need to do is dial that to that same number again, and that bullet is seated exactly as I like it. It's just a great tool, a great addition to the reloader's toolbox. This is the Speer Target Match, Hornady ELD, Sierra Tipped Match Kings, Nosler AccuBond Long Range, and the Berger Hybrid Target Bullets. One of the things I like to look at oftentimes is how much of the case is intruded by the bullet itself. Now again, these are all 168 grain bullets, but notice that some are much longer than others. And then when we try to affect a combined overall length that still fits into the mag, well then the only option available to us is to have that bullet protrude further into the case. It then is going to be consuming case capacity, and it is going to be changing the pressures of these loads. Those bullets that protrude more into the case and consume or gobble up more of the case capacity will end up having, in theory, having a higher muzzle velocity. Now, other things can affect that, but for the most part, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. The thing to think about, though, of course, is that if you are loading a 168 grain bullet, and if you load them hot, or any bullet, and you load it hot, and then you change that bullet, let's say you worked up a load here using the Speer Target Match bullet, and you loaded it hot, you went to maximum powder charge, and then you changed it to, heck, another 168 grain bullet like this Nosler. Well, your pressures are going to be quite a bit higher and you might be in some trouble. The Sierra consumes quite a bit of case capacity. In fact, it's only exceeded by this Nosler AccuBond long-range bullet. Very similar we're seeing with the Berger. It's also interesting that the majority, well, 3 of the 5 bullets here are tipped bullets, and then we have 2 open tip match bullets on either end. Spear target match over here, Berger hybrid target over there. Well, let me get to work on all these different loads, and then I'll meet you out at the range. I got a dry bore, 3 rounds through it for Fowler, so we're all set. That felt good. There's 5. Back on safe. Hornady, ELD, upper right, bullseye. Boy, that felt good. Oh, they're feeling really nice when they're going off. Felt good. Might have went a little bit to the right on that last one, just a hair. Bullets with maybe. That is 5 on safe. All right, this one is the King Sierra tipped Match King. Center bullseye. Boy, that felt good. That one I thought might have flown a little high. Clear on 5. Now this is the Nosler AccuBond long range being fired at the lower left bullseye. Now I can see my flags are all floating, flying a little bit to the left. Might have an effect on the bullets. I don't know if it's got enough velocity to do that, but we'll take that into account. Well, good. That felt good. That's 5. Back on safe. I see we lost audio on this last group. I guess it's not the biggest thing in the world. I would also like to note that I gave a 5-minute, or maybe a little bit more in some cases, but at least a 5-minute cool down period between each of these groups. Lots of data and lots of things to talk about. You know, it's interesting that these same 168 grain bullets shot so differently, and that's been kind of my experience all along. You know, I have not shot this Berger bullet previously. I've shot other Berger bullets in the factory loads in that Ruger precision rifle, but didn't load a Berger bullet like this one myself until just recently. 1.5 MOA. Now, just as a reminder, this rifle of mine normally is getting about a 0.7 and typically sub-MOA groups at whatever yardage that we need to shoot it at. But 1.5 MOA for the 5-shot Berger. And I'd like to talk about that one a little bit because in some ways it looks really promising and I really want to shoot some more groups with it. 3 of those shots right there in the dead bullseye. Just beautiful, really. But then 2 shots off at about, you know, the 2 o'clock position. I thought at first maybe the wind was pulling them. You know, I did make a comment that there is a little bit of wind. Most of that wind was coming from my back, moving straight down range with a little bit of the wind pushing to the left. Now, it's possible that that this round would have been impacting around these 2. That might have been shooting during the lulls, and then these other 3 were shot during a wind situation and it pulled them. That's possible, but not very probable. I watched very closely and listened actually for the wind on the 2 different cameras that I'm using, and these shots were shot at very, very similar, at least how the sound is concerned, shot under very similar wind conditions. I also watched how I was shooting as best as possible. All those shots felt pretty darn good to me. As I was shooting them, I rewatched the video and didn't see that I apparently jerked something or or whatever like that. So I don't think it was that. And then I started thinking, well, maybe something is loose with my scope rings. And by watching the round count, though, the way that it works out, though, is that this was round 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I highly doubt that the rings, the scope is jumping back and forth, let's say. I don't think that that was very probable. And I checked the torque on those rings, and they're shooting, or they're torqued to 18 inch-pounds as they are supposed to be. And I don't think that that was the case. And it also should have been happening with all the rest of the rounds as well. So I don't know what happened with the burgers. They just didn't perform as well as I'd like, but I will be shooting more of those burgers because in some ways they still do look somewhat promising. The second group that I fired was the Hornady bullets, and that I've shot a lot of groups, and it kind of always performs. Actually, this performed a little bit better than normal, 1.03. Let's call it a straight up 1 MOA. Not too bad. I actually liked the group here. It's a nice 4-shot group, and then one off to the side. Same deal. I don't recall me indicating that I pulled anything. And oftentimes, what I'll do, even if I don't leave it in the video, is oftentimes I'll note to myself out loud that I pulled that one, felt like I pulled that one, or something like that. And I didn't. I didn't say anything, and I also watched the video and didn't see anything wrong with that either. 4-shot groups looked nice. That other one pulled again. A little bit of a flyer. The Sierra, as I call it, the king, right? The king, the match king, Sierra tipped match king, gave us a nice sub-MOA group, 0.93 MOA. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. Kind of par for the course, actually a little bit big for what I have done with the Sierra in the past. This Nosler, I have not shot a whole lot of groups with this one, and shot it, it didn't do well at all. 1.55, and it's kind of all over the place. This is the longest bullet that I was shooting today, and it's just didn't do very well. That doesn't mean it won't do well in another rifle. It just means that it doesn't do well in this rifle. And the last one is the Spear target match bullet. That is another very nice group, 0.87 MOA. And it felt really nice as I was shooting that. Felt like I was squeezing the trigger. Just, everything went really, really well with this last group. Sometimes I worry that the last group getting fired, I might have a little bit of fatigue, a little bit tired of things by that point. But nope, that worked out really well. 0.87 MOA, just edged out the Sierra tipped Match King. And my experience, I have shot this bullet before. My experience is that Spear bullet does do pretty well. Normally doesn't beat the Sierra tipped Match King, or at least not by much. I went back to some of my records, and yes, it does shoot pretty darn well. The reason why I haven't chosen the Spear as my kind of go-to bullet is simply because of ballistic coefficient. The Sierra tipped Match King has a much higher, fairly higher ballistic coefficient, and that becomes pretty important as you want to shoot, or if you want to shoot out to longer ranges, let's say 500, 600, 700 yards, 800 yards, and so on and so forth. So the ballistic coefficient then has to be a consideration. Now let's look at some of the other results from these groups that I fired today. And what I mean is, let's take a look at the velocities and the standard deviation of those muzzle velocities. Notice that none of my groups got me into the single-digit standard deviations today. Not really sure why that is. This is a freshly annealed bunch of cases, but you'd think that that would make it better. I'm not so sure it really did. I was running and calculating, measuring neck tension on all of these. We were at 2 to 2.5 thousandths of an inch. Neck tension, pretty consistent. And this rifle, again, usually shoots best with 2 to 2.5 thousandths. I did use a slightly different expander mandrel in this one. That could help explain the little bit of a difference in standard deviation. I'll experiment more with that. But what's also interesting is that the group that gave me the highest standard deviation of muzzle velocities also gave me the smallest group. And that sounds counterintuitive, but you know, sometimes we see that. And we don't want to focus too much on the muzzle velocities and the standard deviation of those muzzle velocities. We've got to look at the proof that's in the pudding, and of course, that is the precision of those rounds downrange. Now, we don't want to, of course, completely ignore the standard deviations, because if we have very high standard deviations, it's just not going to hold up, especially at long range, and we don't want to forget that either. You know, in an earlier episode, we spent quite a bit of time making a lot of different measurements of these different bullets. Some of those measurements were very easy to achieve. Overall length measurement, you can even look that up, so that's a good measurement to make use of. And in the graph or figure we're looking at right now, that is letter A. There's also a very repeatable measure, and that's the base to ogive. That is indicated by letter B. If we flip that bullet around and make a similar measurement with the same Hornady bullet comparator set, you might want to call it the meplat to base or boat tail ogive or something like that. Anyways, that's indicated by letter C in that figure. We can also measure we can measure or calculate the bearing surface length. That is indicated by letter D. And we can also measure the boat tail length. That's indicated by letter A. So I took all these measurements from all these different bullets that we shot today, and I did a quick trend analysis. I graphed what's called a scatter plot. Along the x-axis is the driver variable, in other words, the measurement, and I'm wondering how much this measurement, overall length, etc., how much this measurement affects the precision of those groups, in other words, the MOA. So it's interesting then that there's only 2 measurements that we made that have a reasonable relationship with precision of these groups. And the trend that we're seeing is that, number 1, shorter bullets tend to do better in this Ruger precision rifle. In fact, 38% of the variability that we're seeing in group size can be explained, at least in part, by the overall length of the bullet. In addition, bullets with shorter boat tails tend to do better in this same Ruger precision rifle. And that's an even stronger relationship with an R-squared of 0.41, or in other words, 41% of variability explained by the shorter or by the boat tail length. All the other measurements that I've been making really have no bearing, or very, very little bearing, on the precision of these groups. And I should warn that, you know, this is a pretty darn small sample size, very small sample size, and it is particular, I'll say it's particular to this individual Ruger precision rifle. But there's something more to these bullets. There really is something more to them. It's this overall shape, and how can we really characterize the shape of a bullet? One way that we can do it, I've been thinking about, is by taking the ratio or proportion of one measurement to another measurement. So what I've done is I've calculated the ratio of the base to ogive length to the overall length, as well as the meplat to boat tail ogive. So that is B divided by A, the ratio of the meplat to boat tail ogive to the overall length. So that is. Now what I found is that there's even stronger relationships when I'm using these ratios to understand or to predict, let's say, the precision of a given round. In fact, this Ruger precision rifle tends to shoot better with bullets that have a relatively long MEP-plat to boat tail ogive measurement relative to overall length. When that value is higher, or when that ratio is higher, the gun tends to shoot better. That gave me an R² of 0.65. Related to that, where the ratio of the bearing surface length to overall length is higher, also produces smaller groups. Where the ratio of the boat tail to the overall length is lower, gave us smaller groups. And where the ratio of the bearing surface length to the base to ogive is longer, gave us smaller groups. And all of these have relatively high, nice and high R² values for what we're trying to understand. So all this data is really telling us that this Ruger precision rifle does like somewhat smaller bullets, or tends to shoot shorter bullets better than longer bullets, and is looking for, or tends to like, those bullets that have a shorter boat tail. Now notice I have not fired any bullet that has no boat tail. In other words, no flat base bullets. Might be kind of fun to try that if I can find one. But also we have to have a sufficient bearing surface length, but not a tremendously high bearing surface length. But again, it's not the length of the bearing surface that makes a big difference. It's the ratio of the bearing surface length to the overall length. And there probably is a sweet spot somewhere in that. So what I did is I tried my hand at creating a stylized perfect bullet for this Ruger precision rifle based on these results. Now this may look like somewhat of an odd bullet, and of course a person has to also worry about the stability of these bullets. When you start messing around with the shape of it too much, you might end up making an unstable bullet. But just for the fun of it, I tried my hand at that, and this is what we have come up with. So it's kind of interesting that some of these measurements, and especially the ratio of these measurements, can help us understand why one bullet fires or shoots much better, performs much better in a given rifle than does another bullet. Of course, a person, I could sit here tinkering with the bullet seating depth and so on and so forth, and try my darndest to get a given bullet to shoot really well in this Ruger precision rifle. That may not be worth my while, as long as I can find a bullet, and I have found a couple bullets that do shoot pretty darn well. Well, I'm interested in your experience. What kind of bullets shoot well in your rifles? Doesn't have to be a Ruger precision rifle, doesn't even have to be a .308. I hope some of the stuff that we did today is entertaining as well as informative for you. And as always, thanks for watching.